the academic podcast agency.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Buddha Pill podcast. My name is Miguel Farias. I'm an experimental psychologist and writer. And in this episode, I want to explore the transformative power of meditation. If you've listened to the first 3 episodes of this series, you'll be aware that there's a great diversity of practices that people label as meditation, and that there are also different reasons for embracing meditation as a regular discipline. Despite the variety of techniques and aims, one thing is shared. Meditation is supposed to have an effect, whether it's on your mood, your thoughts, your body, or on your spiritual life. All meditation traditions, including the secular ones, agree that one meditates to change something in oneself. But the truth is, to effect personal change and transformation is hard, and it does take time. While modern science has developed instruments to detect changes in mind and body, meditation traditions have often scrutinized whether these practices are stimulating the right changes. In the last episode, we looked at how meditation experiences can be mapped across different states of consciousness. Some of these might be difficult to understand or relate to, but one constant that seems to reoccur across time and culture is the importance of the heart. Ideas about unconditional love and compassion that are directly attributed to heart-centered experiences are actively sought and understood as transformational in many meditation traditions. And the heart is still an important symbol in Western popular culture today, whether it's heart emojis, or Valentine cards to express feelings of affection, or celebrities advising you to follow your heart. We rely on this organ when we want to invoke anything important about our relationships or emotional projections. But is this use of the heart to express complex experience just metaphor, or is it more than that? And can meditation practice really transform our hearts and behavior? In this episode, I talked to a number of different people from various backgrounds that have thought deeply about what transformation of the heart means for the well-being or spiritual journey of the individual.
You are listening to the Buddha Pill podcast.
Welcome to our contemplation today. Take a deep breath and relax into the practice. Now focus on your breath, going into and out of your heart. Imagine that your heart shines a light which allows you to see all things as they truly are, to discern truth from falsity. This is the light of the Holy Spirit.
So I wasn't born Muslim. I came into accepting Islam as my path, and that was really in sync with exploring a spiritual science of the soul in psychology.
This is Dr. Abdullah Rothman, Director of the International Association of Islamic Psychology, which works at the intersection of Islamic spirituality and mental health practice.
I studied Buddhist meditation, I studied yoga and pranayama, breathing. I studied in the Christian Gnostic tradition. I lived in the hills of Jamaica with a Rastafarian elder, practicing meditation and practicing self-discipline and practicing yoga. And after traveling the whole world and studying all these different traditions, I found in Islam not only the continuity of these spiritual practices, but it really grounded my work in psychology in finding a very articulated science of the soul.
Dr. Rothman is now focused on the role of the heart within Islamic psychology, using something he calls heart-centered attentional training.
I've developed a It's called the Shifa method, and it's a heart-centered somatic therapeutic approach that roots the work in the heart, not necessarily the mind. It's not a cognitive frame, but it is a contemporary therapeutic practice as well as a well-being practice.
What's fascinating about Abdullah Rothman's work is that although he is focusing on therapeutic treatments for what we may still call mental health, he's predominantly interested in the heart as the gateway to personal transformation.
We can understand the heart as a physical, fleshy organ in the body, but that same heart in the same location also has a metaphysical reality to it, a metaphysical dimension. The scholars tell us, all based on the Quran, is that when the heart is sound, then it has the ability to perceive things as they are, so that the heart becomes this vessel of knowing. Oftentimes purification of the heart is talked about in like moral behavior or moral psychology, but it really is light that is occluded. The heart has this natural ability to reflect the light that is the light of truth. And when it gets covered over through worldly attachment, through forgetfulness of that truth, then it starts to grow blind. In the Quran, it says, "Have they not traveled throughout the land so that their hearts may reason?" Right? So already it's saying that the heart, yaqiluna, has this capacity for reason. Indeed, it is not the eyes that are blind, but it is the hearts in the chest. The heart becomes this place where the human being can transcend the veils of this material world and access not only the spiritual transcendent, but actually access knowledge.
Abdullah seems to be saying that the heart exists as more than one thing at the same time. It is both a physical, bodily organ, as well as being a spiritual agent with important moral and rational qualities. But how does this understanding of the heart map onto ideas of therapeutic intervention? And how could it help with healing?
This is the work that I do in my practice of psychotherapeutic work in the heart, is that sometimes I call it spiritual open heart surgery, is that we need to go in and find the places literally in the physical chest and deeper in the spiritual heart where these constrictions have happened through trauma and human experience that creates these coverings or constrictions, and open to them. And how do you open to them? Often, we're trying to push them away, avoid them, bypass them. And so counterintuitively, sometimes it's really about allowing them to be, seeing them for what they are, so that those places of constriction can open. And then in the opening of witnessing that pain, or witnessing where we have forgotten our true origin, and then allowing the witnessing of Allah to enter into the witnessing of that pain. What is the Islamic practice? First and foremost, it's being oriented to the body, because we are so up in the head nowadays, and we're so cognitive, and we understand ourselves as our thoughts in our head. And we need to drop into the body, and physical activity does that, but also centering the center of self in the chest rather than the head.
Thinking of the heart in this way seems at odds with modern scientific thinking, but it hasn't always been this way.
So it's not just as we think of it as a pump, right, for pumping blood and circulating blood around our body. We tend to be craniocentric and think that the brain is the seat of our thoughts and our personality. But previously, the assumption was cardiocentric. It was that the heart was the seat of thinking.
This is Dr. David Leach from episode 3. David is keen to remind us that certain ideas we take for granted today, such as the mind being responsible for rational thoughts while the heart is associated with emotions, are in fact relatively new ways to think about the function of our bodies and our minds. what has happened? So we have lost something which, from what you're saying, has been around Western meditation practices and philosophy for a long time. How come we have reached the 20th century and suddenly the heart is only about this romantic Hollywood sugary thing, and following your heart is following your destructive emotions? So it's been almost reversed.
Yes, that's right. It is a kind of reversal. In the older tradition that we were talking about with these heart-based practices, religious practices and so on, the idea was that passions are disturbing emotions and you don't want to be sort of led by your passions. You lose control of yourself, right, if you're led by your passionate or destructive emotions. You're not free. So what's happened is, from the 17th century onwards, you got the moving away from a heart-centered to a craniocentric, a brain-centered understanding of the person, where the human person is now understood as essentially being in their brain rather than in their heart. But also you have this separation of the idea of feeling from thinking, which happens particularly in the 18th century onwards. And so, for example, in the figure of David Hume, the Scottish philosopher David Hume, his view of the feelings is non-cognitive, right? The feelings are just feelings. They're irrational. They don't give us knowledge about reality. It's thinking which gives us knowledge about reality, which involves a splitting of what was previously not split.
So from everything that you're saying, I'm now doubting how psychologists, modern cognitive psychologists, have appropriated that famous citation from Pascal, that the heart has reasons which reason knows nothing of. So psychologists get hold of this and say, oh yes, this is an illustration of how we have a rational way of cognition, and then we have a more emotional, intuitive one.
Yeah. Often Christian Orthodox thinkers think of Pascal as a sort of honorary Orthodox, actually, insofar as he's sort of within the tradition of the great theologian Augustine, which had an understanding of heart which in turn was based on the scriptural concept of the heart, the cardia. It knows, right? It has a knowing power, right? It's not just it's not just feelings, but it is a knowing through feeling.
So, if we understand the separation between thinking and feeling to be a modern Western phenomenon, I'm left wondering what exactly are the mechanisms which encourage some cultures to identify primarily with the heart and some with the mind.
So we've got these cognitive mechanisms then that get tuned up in different places, but that doesn't mean they are completely free to tune any which way.
This is Professor Justin Barrett, one of the founders of a discipline called the cognitive science of religion.
So part of the project then in explaining any kind of cultural phenomena, but especially religious phenomena, is to identify what are those cognitive mechanisms, what are the parameters on them, and how elastic are they? How subject are they to certain kinds of social learning? Does it take a lot of work to override them or very little work? And different mechanisms are going to have different kinds of properties for presumably very good reasons. In a lot of cognitive science of religion, we start with the assumption that humans are basically, well, they're the same animal. And they actually tend to grow up in very similar environments. And so they've got the same basic equipment in their heads. But the particulars of that basic equipment get tuned up in different places in different ways, based on especially early developing kinds of experiences.
I wondered what Justin would make of this idea that modern-day psychologists have in fact misunderstood philosophers like Pascal and have failed to understand the cognitive function of the heart, a heart that could both know things and be rational. Pascal's famous phrase that the heart has reasons of which reason knows nothing about. This has been used by psychologists to exemplify a dual model of information processing, where they suggest Pascal is referring to these two modes, in which one is reason-based and the other is emotion-based. So what these philosophers are saying is that, no, that's not at all what Pascal is talking about. Pascal is referring to something entirely different based on this tradition, which refers to a felt knowledge of spiritual realities. So for Pascal, this heart knowing is a cognitive feeling of God or the sacred or the nous. Is it possible that there might be a form of knowing or processing that is different from system 1 and 2 that cognitive psychologists haven't thought about?
It does strike me as plausible. Blaise Pascal, he's always struck me as one of the most psychologically astute ones. So when he's got an intuition, I want to take it seriously. Our moral thinking has certain kinds of cognitive components that you think of as, no, that's just reasons. And our reasoning, right, when you feel satisfied in a reason, you feel satisfied. It's a feeling. Cognition is never completely cold, right?
The idea that knowing and feeling aren't independent processes is important for better understanding both the heart and the brain. And in the last 20 years, our understanding of what happens to networks in the brain during meditation has advanced significantly.
The care system is an evolutionary, very old system. It's a foundation for the love of mothers and fathers to their child.
This is the voice of Professor Tanya Singer, talking about a brain network known as the care system, which is a key component of emotional regulation.
This kind of altruistic, unconditional love, you would like throw yourself under a car without rationally thinking, should I throw myself under this car not to rescue my baby, right? You would just do it. But it is also the system which allows for altruistic act towards strangers, bonding between friends for many years, loving relationships, partnerships. And it's very closely related to oxytocin and opiate systems.
Tanya is responsible for a number of pioneering studies concerned with how the brain processes emotions like empathy, and is a renowned researcher in the field of social neuroscience.
Social neuroscience is a field which wants to understand how we as humans and how the brains become social. So how do we understand the feelings, the thoughts of other people, the actions? How do we perceive faces, emotions? How do we communicate? It's not just neuroscientists working together, but psychologists, biologists, anthropologists, animal researchers. It's so a very interdisciplinary broad field.
One such collaboration was with the Tibetan Buddhist monk Mathieu Ricard.
Mathieu Ricard was a French biologist who became a Buddhist monk later. So he had both worlds, right? He knows Western science and he knows Buddhist meditation. And based on these findings, we discovered two different systems for empathy and for compassion.
Now, it may not be immediately obvious to you what the difference is between empathy and compassion. And indeed, Tanya's discovery was that not only are these two distinct ways of socially relating to the world, but they also activate different parts of the brain.
And so I put him in the scanner and I wanted actually to see how the empathy network I had now seen in many, many people for pain, how do they look in a long-term Buddhist meditator? And what we discovered is when I asked him to imagine a horrible video we had seen, a documentary about suffering autistic children in an orphanage. And I asked him in the scanner, please, can you do compassion meditation like you do them now in your Buddhist background? I didn't see the networks lighting up for pain, but I saw networks for care, affiliation, positive emotion, and reward.
At first, these results were deeply confusing to Tanya, who asked Mathieu if he was actually following her instructions properly and whether he was really thinking about people suffering, as she had asked him to. And it was Mathieu's reply to this that led the experiment in an unexpected direction.
You said I have to meditate on compassion, loving kindness, and that has nothing to do with suffering with. It is activating this incredible unconditional altruistic love and wishing them well and this motivation to help. Then I asked him, can you go back into the scanner now and just for the sake of science, can you please just suffer with these children and just do empathy like we define it? And don't go into your whole compassion Buddhism.
But not only did Mathieu find this very distressing, he immediately requested another turn at activating compassion because he felt so out of balance.
And when I wanted to get him out of the scanner more, he begged me and he said, Tanya, this is unbearable. Please let me do some blocks of loving kindness, compassion like before, so that I get in a better state again, right? That I don't leave the scanner in this complete suffering. It's unbearable. And then I saw this care affiliative network coming up again, which has absolutely nothing to do with the empathy for pain network and the suffering. And so we discovered these two biological networks.
So, if we were looking for a biological basis for something resembling unconditional love, a process by which the heart acts with a volition of its own, then the brain's care network could be a good place to start.
When you activate this old network, you are actually not feeling negative emotion. You are feeling warmth, love, concern, a very strong motivation to help, to want the welfare of the other. It's a very altruistic system.
You may be wondering, how do these brain networks express themselves in my day-to-day life? It's one thing for an advanced Tibetan Buddhist monk to demonstrate compassion in this way. But are these extreme acts of altruism actually used by or useful to anyone living a busy, urbanized life today?
We live in a world where we have limbic capitalism, where we're being stimulated constantly into our threat system.
This is Kendall Bond, Clinical Director of the National Centre for Behaviour Change.
When we're on, let's say, social media, the way that we respond, often people will have a reaction in their emotional system. And the more activated that can be, the more likely we are to then be reactive.
Working very much within a secular framework, Kendall is focused on the brain's limbic system, which is understood to play a crucial role in regulating emotions.
In theory, what we're looking to do is move somebody from being reactive to responsive. And the more mindfulness approaches that people can use, the more likely they are to be responsive and response flexible rather than reactive.
Kendall's clinic works with people that are seeking to change their behavior in a variety of ways. Many of them have experienced trauma or have been affected by substance abuse. She uses a combination of different therapeutic techniques, including compassion-based mindfulness.
Mindfulness to me is an idea whereby we are bringing somebody into a space physically, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, supporting them to have approaches, connections, activities that bring them into the very moment that they're in. Especially when we think about trauma, for example, trauma often means that we're stuck in the past or we're anxious about the future. Mindfulness is allowing the person psychologically to come into the very moment. So it's an approach of living, it's a way of being, is a state of mindfulness. And then within mindfulness, you've got many different activities, like meditation.
Although this definition of mindfulness may be different from the Buddhist origins we discussed in episode 1, it's fascinating to me that we are still describing a process by which the body must be made right before the mind will follow.
Mindfulness allows the body to calm down and say, I'm safe. Certainly when the trauma has started to impact their daily life, mindfulness allows them to remind the body that it's safe. And it reminds the body to come into a space of, I'm okay, which then in itself starts to reactivate parts of the brain, which then can promote moral reasoning, thinking, rational decision-making.
So, throughout this episode, we've been thinking about the ways in which meditation can lead to a transformation of mind and body. And perhaps one of the most groundbreaking studies in this field, which sought to identify which type of meditation technique produced what type of transformation, was a longitudinal study carried out by Tanya Singer.
The research project was one of the longest at that time. Why? Because it was a 9-month study, not like typically the 8 weeks MBSR or MBCT studies.
The resource project, which involved over 300 participants, intensively trained the same people in different meditation practices, with the aim of developing a distinct set of skills.
The first module was called Presence, and it contained attention-based mindfulness meditation. So the goal was to stabilize your mind, to become more attentive to the present moment. The second module was called Affect, and this contained all kind of socio-emotional capacities. So empathy, how to move from empathy to compassion, how to avoid moving into empathic distress, gratitude, how to cope with difficult emotions. So it was a socio-emotional module. And then the third module was called Perspective, and that was more socio-cognitive. So this was about multi-perspectivity, about getting a bird's eye perspective on your own mind. There were a lot of different meditation included in each module, but they all had a certain goal, right? And so in this study, we could compare the effect of the three modules with each other.
Assessment of the participants included many different measurements, such as changes in brain activity, social cognition, immune and hormonal markers, as well as measures of cooperation and prosocial behavior.
Through these modules, you were training different brain networks. And what we found is that you had changes, structural plasticity, right? Like thicker gray matter in the brain. So what we could show is that the structure of the brain and also the functions of the brain can change. So this is evidence for functional and structural plasticity, we call that. And at the same time, we could also show that it really matters what you practice. So it really matters whether you do 3 months of attention-based mindfulness, because that will produce very different results than if you do 3 months of socio-emotional, heart-opening compassion exercises, or if you do 3 months of exercises and meditations which actually shift metacognition and perspective taking.
The implications of Tanya's work are profound and the data sets are vast. Since 2014, when the measurements of this study came in, many researchers have been analyzing the data, and the results have been published in many high-quality scientific journals. We'll put a link in the show notes to this work, so you can take a deeper dive if you'd like to do so. But it's worth mentioning in summary that Tanya believes meditation practices are not only a tool to create prosocial changes within individuals, but these techniques are also capable of affecting change within our institutions and governments. And so, whether we're talking about a transformation of the heart or the mind, or whether we consider the distinction between them to be false, and concede that the brain can experience emotions just as a heart might hold knowledge, the desired result of much of this transformation is often an improvement in our relationships, something that can be both practiced and improved upon. David Leitch again.
These heart-based practices are not done just for the sake of cultivating the experiences themselves, but so that they will have a positive impact on your action in the world, right? They will transform you as an acting being, right? As someone who does things and interacts with others. Francis de Sales, who's one of the great exponents of French heart mysticism, in his Introduction to the Devout Life, that's a famous devotional text published in 1609, he recommends that you practice for about an hour a day, ideally in the early morning, and you deliberately cultivate holy thoughts or imaginations. So, for example, imagine loving God or loving your neighbor, or craving the glory of paradise, or try to excite a zeal for the salvation of others. And you should then allow those feelings as you imagine them to grow in you. And that you have to always stop the mind from wandering onto worldly thoughts when you do that practice. Like when you shut a bird within a cage, he says. Ultimately, these things are oriented towards action, so they're alive and influencing They will have a positive impact on your action in the world. They will transform you as an acting being.
I have been studying and writing about meditation for the past 15 years. I've studied both the psychological and historical accounts of meditation practices. I have conducted experiments on the effects of meditation, and for this podcast, I have traveled widely from North America to Europe, India and China to speak to all kinds of meditation experts. What I have learned from them reinforced my intuition that meditation is not one, but many things. Different practices with different goals, with multi-level descriptions of places one can reach in our minds or in the spiritual hierarchies of the cosmos. But I was surprised to also find commonalities across traditions, including with the modern secular practices like mindfulness-based stress reduction. The key commonality is the way in which meditation practices aim to change our ordinary self. This can vary from reducing anxiety to a deep transformation of our minds, emotions, and even bodies. But at its core, we are looking at a deeply creative process of exploring and crafting the self in sometimes surprising ways. Some of the people I talked to, like Jessica Frazier and Swami Ambikananda, spoke about this process of creativity, this curiosity that opens doors in how we see ourselves and the world around us. In order to develop a multidimensional science of meditation, we need new tools to study the variety of practices and new theories that can explore the multiple conscious states described in these traditions. In many ways, the science of meditation is still in its infancy. Throughout this podcast, I have often felt like an astronaut exploring new places and possibilities. Perhaps that is what meditation makes of all of us who engage with it, astronauts of inner space. Thank you to all of our contributors that featured in this episode of the Buddha Pill podcast. And thank you for taking time to listen. If you found this show interesting and would like to get in touch, then please do so via the Academic Podcast Agency website. And please have a look at the show notes for any further readings and resources on all of the studies and concepts covered here today. The Buddha Pill podcast was presented by me, Miguel Farias, and was produced by the Academic Podcast Agency and Perfect Motion.